Hi, I'm Ted Kofi, and welcome to another video. This one deals with the balance of maintaining respect for our individual differences and diversity while maintaining the capacity for us as a society to function together efficiently. Now, it's never been more relevant because the whole world faces a unified threat, the threat of what's being called the greatest pandemic since the Spanish flu, and the requirement that we find public health measures that can enable us to maintain our personal levels of safety while mitigating the risk we offer each other for cross-infection and that sort of thing. I'm calling the tape, Are You Convergent or Divergent? And it has a special resonance for people of color, Black people, because everywhere in the world, we seem to have been differentially impacted by, certainly in the Western world, by the ravages of COVID-19. And also across the world, there seems to be a differential level of appreciation, worth, value, call it what you will, for people who have skin shades like mine. And so, given the fact that we all live on one planet and in our countries, one country, how do we respect the differences, the very real diversities there are amongst us while maintaining social cohesion? My use of the name divergent or convergent derives from a science fiction series I started watching. I think it was about 2012 I saw the first one. It was actually originally a trilogy written by Veronica Roth, which talked about this issue of maintaining individuality in a world which had been ravaged, a post-apocalyptic world which had been ravaged by some kind of global conflict. And the series, they were called Divergent, Insurgent, and Allegiant. The resonance is, because I watched the film again recently, with what's happening in the world now, absolutely chilling and eerie, and to think that that film was made back in 2012. So here we are. If you're Black, living in the West, as I do in London, you have the opportunity to present to society in one of two ways, as what I call a convergent or as what I call a divergent. What are the convergents? The fundamental attitude of the convergent Black person in the West is one who seeks the validation of the mainstream society. Bear in mind, always, Black people are in the far tiny minority of people. It's not like in America, where Black people form maybe between 15-20% of the US population. Certainly in the United Kingdom, we're talking about perhaps 3% of a population north of 65 million people. So we tend to be in the minority. So the attitude of those who become successful is that they're constantly seeking the approval of society, and this creates and begs a number of problems. First of all, when you're seeking the approval of another, they reserve the right to give it to you or to remove it. Your life is essentially in somebody else's hands. First thing. Second thing is, do they have the judgmental norms to even tell what good looks like? Because you are not like them. They come from a completely different ethnic background. You do not, in 100, even if you're born here, there will be differences in your outlook, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And the question arises, do white people know what good looks like amongst Black people? All the evidence of our eyes suggests that actually most white people don't have a conception of what Black people should be. They have never been taught. And so society tends to rest on a number of very broad, I would say, very lazy stereotypes of who and how we are. Let's go to the other side. By the way, the people who become convergents are rewarded by society with MBEs, OBEs, other gongs, elevation in the workplace, and so on. But owing to the fact that they're constantly seeking the approval of the majority, they are never, ever in the box seat of anything that they do, despite their elevation with gongs, high executive titles, even more money paid to them at work. They are essentially the hostages of their circumstances. Then you have the divergents. Now, divergents are those who don't seek approval from other people. They think to themselves what good looks like, what they should do as a civil member of the wider society in which they live, and they go ahead and do it. Now, of course, if you have that attitude, you don't carry the burden of having to be approved by somebody else. You essentially approve and validate yourself. So the issue of having to chase a carrot, which can be moved around willy-nilly and up to, according to the whims and caprices of the person who's offering you the carrot with society, you don't have to chase your own tail trying to catch that elusive carrot. So approval becomes irrelevant. Now, what do other people do in society? Let's take another minority. There are Italian Brits, or there are Italians who live in England, and there are Spaniards, there are French folk, there are other Europeans, Germans, and so on. They are, to a person, they're all divergents, because nobody expects them to be looking up to other English folk for approval. They are given their head to be who and what they want to be, and they'll be judged more or less by their output. But what all such people have in common is that they're all white. It is black folk who are expected to be convergent, i.e. seeking validation and approval of the white majority. So their diversity, your diversity, if you're white, is respected as a quirk of your personality, the spark of your individuality that makes you unique. It's respected, it's validated, it's actually endorsed by society as the thing that makes you, sparkle in a sea of people who are all more or less the same. Now, the difficulty for black convergence, which is what most so-called successful black people have to become, is that they are hostages to their circumstances. Their value is uncertain and may be removed at any time. I'll give you an example. I mean, the Windrush scandal was a case where people who were nailed on British, they'd been here all their lives, some of them in really at the kind of in the evening of their lives, where they'd given their hardest working years to the United Kingdom, just got swept away and told to go back to Jamaica or somewhere else in the Caribbean. The same thing applied to Africans, actually, of that generation, and all because they took for granted that, well, look, I've been here long enough. I'm one of the team. I'm a Brit. Didn't matter. They got swept away just like that. When it comes to creativity, people who are constantly seeking the validation of others are constantly thinking, what do the others want to see from me? All creatives only think of one thing. What is that spark that's arising from within me, and how do I express it? They don't seek the approval or the validation of anybody else. When it comes to leadership, true leaders think about those they are leading. However, essentially, They're focused on their mission and how to describe and explain this to those who they lead. A leader who is hogtied by constantly having to weigh themselves down with the expectations of others lacks that sparkle and sometimes the ability to make the tough decisions and the tough calls that he needs to make. Ultimately, anybody who is constantly seeking validation is lackluster, dull, and uninspiring. I couldn't complete this video without asking myself what I am. Of course, I'm completely divergent, although I started off as a nailed-on convergent, until I realized that you can't achieve anything if you're constantly needing the approval and the validation of other people. Now, what should be said is this: whether you're convergent or whether you're divergent doesn't mean that you can't work in a cohesive society. It's the way in which you work to create cohesion, that social cohesion, that counts. Divergents tend to think of what is good for my society first. First and foremost, what is good for my society? What works for my society? And with that thought in mind, they go about doing what it is that they do. A convergent asks themselves first, how do I fit in? And this is a value-laden expression. I don't mind acknowledging that, but they're constantly pandering to what their society seems to want them to be. I would argue that their ability to contribute to a vibrant society is hugely limited. Now, I can't blame Black folk who become convergents, as I would say the vast majority of so-called upwardly mobile, so-called successful Black people wind up becoming. It's the call they've made based on their observation of their reality. And this becomes a huge problem when you live in pandemic conditions. Because when you have the issue of individual respect for individual rights and liberties being thrown up as the binary opposite of social cohesion, there is the massive risk of creating a totalitarian state. And those who are convergents are actually the fodder of totalitarian states. They become the best citizens for a totalitarian state, whether it's the right thing for their society or not. That is why I argue that it is important now for those Black people who are in positions of executive responsibility to stand up, bite the bullet, and actually start to think more in terms of what works for our society than pandering to society by asking itself what society expects of me. My answer to that: society doesn't know what to expect of you because society's never really studied you for who you are. Society is imposing, in the main, lazy stereotypes about what a person like me is supposed to be like, think like, feel like, without listening to what I am telling you. What I'm telling you now isn't made up. I didn't read this in a book. After more than middle age in my lifetime, I know what my life feels like and what I see around me. None of this, none of it is a figment of my imagination. And so this post really is a shout out for more divergence in society so we can actually do what is good for our society, not pander to what the majority in any society we live in, be it global, be it national, be it group, be it urban, be it rural, be it whatever the universe that we're operating in, it is important, first and foremost, to think what is right for my society more than what the next person wants me to do. Thanks very much.